We've got an old coffee table that needed restoring because it was kind of falling apart. At first I was just going to sand it down just because it looked kind of bad and refinish it, but as you can see it literally fell apart. So I decided it needed a bit more fixing than just that. I did spend some time trying to see if I could break the second joint on it as well, but it was holding up so strong that it wasn't worth it. So the first job was sanding. I had little sanding blocks that I used to get into the corners because I knew my orbital sander wouldn't get in those spaces, and then as soon as that was done, just get the sander out and sand the entire thing. Seeing as I was just taking quite a light pass just to get like the old finish off, I just used a pretty high grit that I've got spare, because I don't tend to sand above 180 usually, so I had some spare discs that were like higher than that, and just gave it a quick once over the entire thing to get most of the old finish off. Honestly, it's not even about getting rid of the finish, it was just, there were some water rings and like little bits of damage like that I was more interested in getting rid of. After sanding, it was time to glue it back together, and this is where things started going bad. I expected this to be a pretty easy job, but quite quickly when it came to doing this, it already was going poorly. Mostly it's just that I really hate this glue bottle. I couldn't get any glue to come out of it at all, so in the end I ended up taking the lid off and just pouring it out instead. That worked a bit better, but that was more of an inconvenience than an actual problem. The real problem is that the joint itself was just way too tight. At the time when I'm trying to glue it up at first, I didn't realise just how bad it was. I had done a test fit without glue, and it was tight then, but I thought it'd be okay. But after I'd put all the glue in place and put the wood back in place, it wouldn't go. I couldn't get it to comfortably sit in the joint. And I think that's actually what the problem with it was. I think this joint specifically had been like glue starved when it had been put together in the first place, because the joint was so tight it had actually just squeezed all of the glue out of it. So it had just been like held on by the mechanics of the joint rather than anything like actually helping it. And I think that's why this joint fell apart, whereas the other joint is totally fine still. This led to a lot of problems, to be honest. I had to take it apart again, which you'll see. Then I didn't end up recording the next chunk of it because I was like too stressed, and I actually ended up like stabbing myself with a chisel at one point, so I was not really thinking about recording at the time. But what I ended up having to do was take it back apart, remove all of the glue from the joints that I just put in, and then spend close to an hour just going through and cleaning up all the joints, and then sanding all the joints down just a bit. So I had a file that I used for that because I don't have anything like a rasp, and filed down the sides of every piece of the joint and rounded over the corners a bit so that they would slide together a bit easier. Even with that, it was still tight, but I did eventually manage to get it all back together. This video was actually not supposed to be restoring this coffee table. I was actually going to make a wooden mallet in this video, which is also why you can see me use a hammer a lot. I shouldn't have been using a hammer, I should have been using a mallet, but the plan was to make a mallet and use that in restoring this coffee table. But we're actually like moving soon, so a lot of my tools, proper tools, are away, not really in usable places. So I couldn't really get comfortable access to them, and I didn't feel like getting them out just to make a mallet that I'm going to use once before we leave, so I just didn't bother. I wanted to get this done before we left though. So this is actually also going to be one of the last videos you see in this area, which is why I'm filming outside, because now I'm not so bothered if you see it. To make up for not including me filing the joints and re-gluing stuff, you can have a little video of my cat. After the glue up had actually worked though, now I have to clamp it in place, and I don't have long enough clamps to clamp it by the actual sides or anything. So what I did instead was I got an offcut of a 2x4 and wrapped it in packaging tape because glue doesn't stick to that, and then used 2 clamps to clamp it to one edge and another 2 clamps to clamp it to the other edge at 90 degrees to each other, so it would like pull the sides together. It'd be nice if I had some longer clamps or some like corner clamps, but I don't, but this worked. So we actually went out at this point, got some dinner, and then came back and I took it out of its clamps. So I usually wouldn't have done that because we'd only been gone for about an hour or two, but for one thing I wanted to get it all done in one day, which would have been tight if I'd left it any longer, but also it was a really hot day, so I knew the glue was going to have settled by that time. And I also knew, because it was so tight, that it was relatively mechanically strong anyway, and it was just the glue was going to help that more than anything. So I felt comfortable enough to take the clamps off at that point, and then just give the edge that I just glued up another sanding. Once that was all done, it was on to finishing. It's my second favourite finish. Of the 3-4 different finishes I've used recently, this is my second favourite. My favourite is still the wax that I made, just because it's quite nice and it smells nice and it doesn't cause any problems if you touch it or anything, and it's also really easy to apply, but it's not a particularly hard wearing finish, so I wanted something that was a bit stronger. Still not the strongest of finishes, but stronger at least. So for that I used some teak oil, So the first process is you just wipe the thing down, make sure it's completely clean. And then you get a little pot, pour some teak oil in it, and a paintbrush, and then you paint it, and that's it. You then leave it 15 minutes and wipe it off, and that is the entire finishing process, which is why I like it so much. The issue with it though is that it does smell really bad, and it is not healthy. It's not something you should be breathing in, which is why I was wearing my mask for this. Also why I'm doing it outside. I do also have a problem with this bottle. It's one of those bottles with a childproof lid, so the children can't get into it. The first time I opened it, the childproof lid just came off, so it's just a normal lid now, which is fine. It's not like a problem for me, but you'd hope they'd put a bit more effort into making it safe. But it literally just came apart in my hands. One of the things I really like about this finish as well is that you can really watch it change. There's a very big change in colour after you paint it on. I actually don't particularly like the colour, but if you leave it for a few days it calms down a lot. Once you first put it on it seems very orange, but after a couple of days it's not that bad. So then you just leave it 15 minutes, like I said, come back and wipe it off, and then it's done. So I did that. Afterwards I repeated the process on the inside of the coffee table, and then I was finished. If the first glue up had worked, this entire project would have taken me about 3 or 4 hours. Because the first glue up didn't work, it took more like nearly 6. Especially because, like I say, I actually stabbed myself with a chisel at one point, so I had to go and sort out my finger. It's okay, but I did bleed quite a lot everywhere. It's fine, but without that I would have got it done a lot faster, which would have been nice. Overall though, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The only issue I do have is because the glue up was such a mess, I got a lot of glue on the outside of the wood that I didn't want to, and the finish doesn't take over that particularly well. There's some bits where you can kind of see the glue, but over time that should go away. But yeah, that's pretty much it, and this may well be the last video you'll see from this place, so I'm not entirely sure what next month's video is going to be at this point. I originally was planning for it to be the Game of the Year video, but with moving it probably won't be. Thanks for watching.
Special thanks to my patrons, Justin Wood, Hobbs and Koopy Vegeta. You can join my patrons at patreon.com/Holden Gatsby, check out my TikTok and Twitter at Holden Gatsby, and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Holden Gatsby. Don't forget to subscribe to all of my channels. If you want more, you can watch my last video now, but if not, then thanks for sticking around. Bye.